Hey everyone, our guest on today's episode is Erik Osberg. He has a very cool job title, which we get into, and it's kind of the basis of our entire discussion. Erik is the Rural Rebound Initiative Coordinator. He is located in Otter Tail County, Minnesota. And basically, we get into a discussion about what the heck is a Rural Rebound Initiative and how do those of us that don't have the funding or have that specific thing, how do we take some of what he's doing? How do we learn from what he's doing? This is a fun episode because we harken back to everybody's favorite rural sociologist, Ben Winchester. We talk about that. So in this episode, we talk a lot about just what drives people to move to small towns. How do we capture that? How do we influence that? And what can every single person in every small town do to start to take control of the story? Erik is a great guy, super fun. I had never met him in person. I still haven't, but you could just hear his passion for what he's doing. And there's so much that we can learn. And again, even if we don't have a specifically funded position, what is the average person trying to do cool stuff in their small town? How do they take things away? And there's plenty to take away. So enjoy this episode with Erik Osberg. Well, hey, Erik, welcome to the Growing Small Towns Show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So you, my friend, I'm calling you my friend already because we talked for 2 minutes and I said I already like you, which is always really fun. So I came across you in your title specifically, and we're going to get into that here. You're a Rural Rebound Initiative Coordinator, right?
That's right.
And you're located in Otter Tail County, Minnesota. So you're my friendly neighbor to the east. And this was in a Daily Yonder article, and we'll reference the article in the show notes, but you've worked with and talked a bit about some of Ben Winchester's, his data and his research. And so why don't you tell us a bit about what that actually means, what your work feels like day to day? And I guess my follow-up question to that is, for those of us that maybe live in a community that won't ever actually create a position called Rural Rebound Initiative Coordinator, what could the average person do, right, to channel some of that? Because I think if nothing else, it sounds like something we should all be primed to be thinking about is in small towns, right? So it's awesome to have you. Let's hear all about this initiative and what it looks like.
Well, again, thanks for having me. I really appreciate you reaching out. So I started in 2017. So January of 2017, I started this brand new job at Otter Tail County. It was grant funded in the first 2 years. My boss, Nick Leonard, super smart guy. He had met with stakeholders throughout the community. How do we address this work? This was 2016, right? Mm-hmm. And we were trying to address the workforce shortage then, right?
Uh-huh. I want to be like, how's that going for you, Erik? It's hard, right? And it's particularly hard now. Yeah.
It's not as bad as it was supposed to be. Let's put it that way. Our numbers are better than they were projected. We were just looking at them this morning from a data point. But so anyway, so they had this grant funded position. It was going to be grant funded for 2 years. And to your point, it's based off of Ben Winchester's brain gain research. Mm-hmm. And Ben Winchester's, the traditional narrative of rural is we're dead, we're dying, everybody's moving away.
Yeah, like our best talent, right? Our young educated talent, they are leaving in droves. That's the story. And Ben has data that says, now, wait a minute. If you look at age cohorts, if you look at 30 to 49-year-olds, mm-hmm. these are people that many, not necessarily all, but many rural places have a net gain of 30 to 49-year-olds. Your population may be growing. It just doesn't look like people thought it would. Do you know what I mean? So two quick things to this, Erik, just for our audience. If you don't know who Ben Winchester is, we will be also, because he was on our show, so he's been on the podcast, and so we'll make sure that because I can't remember what episode it is. That would have been really good prep work for me to do, but I don't prep. We just sit down and we have a conversation. So we'll make sure that we link to that episode. But the other thing so that's the first thing, is so people know they don't have to try to find him. We'll get him to you. But the thing with this particular the net gain of this specific age group, right?
Yep.
Our communities on the whole still may be losing overall population because we might not be attracting and recruiting that group of people back at a pace to keep up with those that are dying, which is that's a challenge, right? That's something that we need to be thinking about. But I think it doesn't tell the whole story. If it's just, and that's what Ben is trying to point out, like if we're actually gaining population in this key demographic, and I mean, it's a key demographic because that's the age that a lot of people might, when you're out of your 20s, you might have some financial stability. You might be able to add back to your economy a bit more readily and easily. You tend to be, that's the group that has children, and so children add to our schools and children add to our population and all those things. So that's the reason it's so compelling, because if you don't dig deeper, you wouldn't know that.
And I would take, and you're absolutely 100% right, and take it one step further. And those people have 1.2 kids versus in the olden days, they used to have 2.2 kids.
Right.
And so I've heard Ben use the words total population infatuation, right? Like everybody gets infatuated with our total population. And that's a unwinnable war, right? Like you're not gonna, unless people are going to start having more kids and people are going to stop dying. So your question was, on a day-to-day basis, what does my job look like? Or what does this initiative look like? And what it boils down to, so I started in 2017. I got the job. I went and listened. And if you've had Ben Winchester on, then you know, right? Like you've heard the pitch. And I went and listened to Ben speak, and he talked about narratives. He said there's a traditional narrative of rural. Mm-hmm. And then he talked about rewriting the rural narrative, right? And so I've altered that a tiny bit, and I take the re out of it. I just say that we're writing our own narrative. And we used to, and this is not a knock, this is not meant to be detrimental, but we used to depend on traditional media to write our narrative.
100%. Right.
And now we don't, right? Like I'm talking on a podcast with you right now. This is you writing your own narrative. And so that's what we do, is we write our own narrative on a daily basis, 7 days a week and 24/7. And we use a lot of digital formats to do that. And that's what it looks like, is writing our own narrative and documenting the real reasons why people would choose to live in a place like this. I don't spend a lot of time making commercials. I'm doing air quotes for your audio audience right now. I don't spend a lot of time making commercials, right? Like we're just telling stories in various manners of the good reasons that people choose, that they choose, a lot of talented young people choose to live here. Why is that? We ask them, and then they tell us, and then we announce it to the world. So that's my gig.
Yeah, I love it. I love it so much. And I have some questions for you. Like, as you're talking to that particular demographic, right? Which I think in Ben's research, and again, I'll just say this, like I gave Ben a hard time. I was like, I don't usually get too stoked about data. Like it's just, I know you need it. Like it's just not my brain. I am not a researcher brain. I am an anecdotal story collector. That would be much more my speed. So I said, I love that you make data this captivating. Like he's really captivating.
He is super.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's super awesome. Yeah. And then he's a rural sociologist. Like who knew that was even ever going to be a thing? So anyway, Ben is absolutely a guy to know. But talking about this demographic, and then again, too, like what are the reasons? Why might people want to be coming back? So what is it that you're finding? What are the stories that you're hearing specifically? If this is that the group you're targeting, first of all?
Yep, for sure.
Just because those are the ones that, again, it's raising the goal. This was something Bennett said. When you focus on that particular age, you're looking to overall reduce your median age, right?
Yeah.
By bringing in that group of people, because like my community, so I'm in a town of 1,800 people, we don't have a college here. So we are going to, so again, you want to talk about inevitables, right? People are going to die. It's an inevitability. People are having less and smaller families. That is an inevitability, something we're not going to change. And it is also inevitable, pretty much, that if kids are going to further their education, they're going to leave our community. the question is like, what kind of things do we have to lay in place for them to even know that this could be a destination for once that part of their story or journey is over, right? So anyway, what are you finding, Erik, as you're having these conversations? What are the most compelling things that you've heard since you've been doing this kind of work?
Well, we're blessed in that we have a ton of outdoor recreation in Otter Tail County, Minnesota.
Yeah.
We've got, and I don't want to focus on what we have and what other areas don't have, that outdoorsy lifestyle, right? I will say this, and across the board, wherever you are in the world, okay, if you're in a rural place, people are looking for a slower pace of life. They're looking for connectivity with community. They're looking for good schools. They're looking for affordable housing. They're looking for, and these are things that can happen anywhere, right? Like those types of things aren't attached to a place on earth. Those can be fairly universal.
Right.
And so the funny thing is in Ben's research, and I'll reference back to Ben's research, a job isn't in the top 8 or 9. You know what I mean? Like the old school way of thinking was people are going to move here. Let's get the jobs. Yeah. And then people are going to move here for the jobs. And what we're saying is not necessarily in that order. People are going to move here as a lifestyle choice. And I heard an interesting quote the other day when somebody said, if you've seen one small town, you've seen one small town. So the reason I bring that up is each community. So you asked, what can a community do that doesn't have what should we be doing, or how could we begin? What I would say is the first step, if there's any community organization going on at all right now, is try to figure out what your strengths are.
Right.
What is your community good at? What are you proud of? I've run meetings. I've been in a group of community, and there's community members, and it doesn't take long before the conversation starts to trend towards what you used to have or we don't have, right? Well, we don't have this.
That is another big one, Erik. Seriously, what a great point to make, because so one of the quotes that I love is that I want next year and the years ahead of us to be the good old days. Like, why is it that and a lot of times it's because you remember that specific time in your life as being a time of goodness and awesomeness. We can't live in the past. And I always say, like, if it was so great, well, let's talk about what that could look like in today's context, right? So that's a huge thing. I think we hold on to like days forgotten and we mourn it instead of getting creative about how to bring that kind of feeling back.
And I'll keep giving credit to Ben. Ben says nobody is going to move to your community out of pity. Right?
That's my favorite thing that came out of his mouth. I've said it so many times.
Right. Like people, again, so when I'm holding these community meetings, and again, it's kind of, you mentioned inevitable. It's inevitable that eventually the conversation turns to what we used to have or what it used to be like or what we don't have or whatever. What I've said is, tell you what, this isn't that meeting. Yeah. We're not going to talk about that. I'm not ignoring that. Whatever issues we have or problems we need to solve, that's great. But that's a different meeting on a different day. Today, we're going to talk about what our strengths are. And I'm going to paraphrase Ben again. People want to live in your community for who you are right now.
Right.
They just don't know about you yet, right? And the awareness isn't there yet. And so that's what we spend a lot of time is we've done individual work with individual communities within the county to try to come to a shared understanding of what is this community's assets, and then how do we communicate those assets to the rest of the world. And I use that phraseology because I mean it, right? Like that's the other thing is you're not limited in where you can be drawing your future residents from. Like they can be from Washington State, they could be from Florida, they could be from Texas, they could be from the coast, they could be from down south, they could be from a different country, they could be from anywhere, right? And so people want to live in rural communities. The data suggests that people want to live in rural communities for what they offer as is right now. And it's just a matter of introducing community X or community Y or community Z as an option. I will say this though. So I'm what we call and again, I'm doing the air quotes. Sorry, it's a visual cue.
As long as you say it's air quotes, then they would hear it with air quotes, like sarcasm font, right? Like,
right. So I'm what we call the on the map person. It's my job to put Otter Tail County on the map. There are other people who are smarter than me that are working on what we call infrastructure need, childcare, housing, broadband. There's people that are working on employer and employee resources. How do we help our current employers or our current employees be bigger, faster, and stronger? And then the fourth element of this, it's a four-legged stool, if that's a thing. The fourth element is what we call welcoming communities. Because what we say is if myself and my team did a great job of marketing Otter Tail County as a place to live, and there was the housing and the broadband and the childcare, and there was the jobs and all that was set up. And when people came, if they didn't feel welcomed, the likelihood of them telling their friends and neighbors, or the likelihood of, I hate to take it so far as them staying, right? Those are the four things that we have identified, putting us on the map, which is my job, creating infrastructure that is needed for newcomers, supporting our employers and employees, and then trying to not necessarily create welcoming communities, but again, amplifying the ways which in our communities are already welcoming. And if there's a way to help foster that and grow that, great. But that's really our four-legged stool approach to the resident recruitment puzzle. The other thing that if I can keep going, the other thing that I would say is we use tourism as a first date. And what I mean by that is people don't just walk up to somebody and say, "Hey, will you marry me?" That's a process. That's a long sales cycle. Again, back to the traditional way of looking at it, in the traditional form, economic development or resident workforce recruitment is over here, and tourism is way over there, and never the twain they shall meet, right? What we're saying is no, people live here for the same reasons they visit here. And so we've incorporated the live work message into our tourism message. So we're like, come and visit, come and play, come and stay, come on vacation. Oh, by the way, you don't have to leave. There's plenty of jobs. And so that's the other element that I think that is a little bit different than most other elements out there, is we embrace tourism as a means to get our livability message out there.
Yeah, I love this approach. I think there's a lot of how you and this particular initiative approaches these topics that really resonates with me. Like, it lands with me. I always call myself like a reluctant economic developer, because I technically do that for the community of Oaks. I don't have that traditional outlook on it at all. Because again, if jobs were the thing that made people move to our communities, we live 30 miles from a bobcat manufacturing plant. Yeah. They employ like 1,200 people. That community would be booming.
Right.
But it's not. A lot of people travel in for those jobs. And now with remote employment, that opens up a whole world of different people. And so this, to me too, when I think about this, we're talking resident recruitment, what we're talking about is the human capital. We're trying to attract new humans to our places, right? So some people call it talent attraction. Some people call it resident recruitment. Call it what you want. We're talking about humans, and humans make their decisions based on emotion, right? And so this whole thing with welcoming communities too, what that leads to, it's not just like their first 30 days, right? It's about the fact that the quicker that we can have them plug into the things they love and the things they care about, the much more likely we will be to get them to stay, right? Because that's where a sense of belonging gets fostered. It's often through contribution or finding the ways to plug into the stuff you love to do, right? Like, that's the point of it.
100%. And I agree wholeheartedly. The phrase I've used, you sell the sizzle, not the steak, right? A steak is a steak, but so it's an emotional long-term decision that people are making. And so figuring out a way to create a welcoming message that resonates with the others. And the other thing is, so back to, you had mentioned the kids who want an education are going to have to move away, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So one of these, and this is another thing, again, this isn't my doing, this is just somebody else who's working on this, but we have a youth skills training program that is fairly new in the last year and a half-ish. And what happens is, like right now, what's happening is these high school students are going on tours of various employers, right? And the way that I look at it is, we're not necessarily trying to keep them from leaving. We're just trying to plant the seed that, go ahead and leave, chase your dreams. We love you. We're proud of you. Go conquer the world. But when you turn 30 years old and you decide, you know what, maybe this wasn't what I really want in life, there's a job for you here. And it's not failure to move back home. You didn't lose. If it's time to dream a different dream, now that's okay. And that's growth. That's not losing, that's growth.
It's so I wrote a book it's actually called How Mommy Got Her Groove Back. But it 100% is about that time in my life. I moved back here. I was 28. So I was almost 30. We hadn't had kids yet. And a lot of people get really pissed, frankly, when I say this, but I really struggled with that feeling of like, what does it say about me that I'm back here? And people get mad about that. But I think if we don't acknowledge that that's the story that we've been telling an entire generation of kids, then we're missing the opportunity. Because pretending it's not there isn't going to help anything, right? We can't work through stuff if we're not willing to say it out loud. So I make some enemies when I talk like this, but it's a real thing. I just get really excited about the fact that like we now can tell these young kids, like especially if they're going and they're getting their college degree or they're going to a trade school or whatever they're doing, that, it's great if your dream is to go out, right?
Yep.
You won't know if it's right for you until you do it. And so if you do it, if you go out and there's something missing or you're feeling some other calling, there's a good chance that with the right support network, the right people in place, the right set of factors in your hometown, that dream could actually live in your community. Like small towns, there's no, like the size, my thing is that the size of your zip code doesn't determine the size of your life anymore. Like it used to, because we used to, we lived in a different world. I didn't have a cell phone when I graduated from high school. That wasn't a thing. I didn't get one until I was in college, right? So our world, the fact that our world gets delivered to us through phones now, like there's almost no opportunity that can't be achieved unless it's like corporate work, right? Like obviously there's certain things you'd have to leave for, but that's where our opportunity is, I think, Eric, is to show them. Like it's amazing the kinds of things you can do from any corner of the world, as long as you have good internet. And that's why infrastructure is important for sure. Right? I mean, that's the story we've got to take a hold of.
And I agree with you in that if you don't address it, or if you can't say it out loud, it becomes this scary thing that nobody talks about. There are some that view this youth workforce thing that we're going to call it. There's some that view it as a way to keep kids from leaving. And I'm like, you couldn't 18-year-old kids are going to leave. Like I would rather that they left and explored the world and did whatever it is, because you never want to feel like somebody has been trapped or coerced, or they have an itch that they didn't get to scratch, right? So that's another thing that when you talk about, you get a little bit of pushback. That's where I get a little bit of pushback, is I'm like, listen, our goal is not to keep kids from leaving small towns, because that's been happening since the dawn of time, right? Like that's a human instinct, right? Like you grow up and you want to leave your home, right? Like that's, you fly the coop, right? And then, and when you grow up in a small rural community, that could mean not only literally leaving the home you grew up in, but leaving the community that you grew up in. And all you have to do though is to your point, reposition that rebound as a viable good option. It's not failure. You didn't lose. It doesn't mean that the world beat you. It just means that you went out in the world, you took a look around, and you said, you know what? When I start having kids, and that's the other factor here, and you didn't have them when you returned, but you were getting closer, assuming you have kids now. Do you have kids?
Yep.
Okay, yep, right? Yep. So you started to look at the world around you, and you remembered where you grew up, and you were like, you know what? I want my kids to grow up in that same environment. So you bring them back, and then now your kids are probably, your kids are going to leave and they're going to go explore the world.
Right.
And you could tell them, hey, it's okay to come back if and when you want to. So
right. There's two things that are coming to mind too. One is that one of the biggest things I think, and I would love your opinion on this, sure, that our communities need to maybe grow in or develop within ourselves is our willingness to let ourselves be changed by those rebounders. That's the thing is, they come back to us on fire to add value based on what they learned and what they experienced. And what I found when I first came back was a lot of people like, oh, like, who do you think you are? Right. Kind of a thing. Right. And I didn't, and that might've been my approach. Like, it's not like all the people were just hard on me, but we need to be willing to let ourselves be changed instead of fighting everything that's new. And that's not just for rebounders, that's for newcomers, period, right? We don't need everybody to assimilate. And that's a Ben Winchester thing too. He doesn't like that phrase because it suggests that we're saying, toe the line, fall in line. This is how we do things here. And if you want to fit here, you've got to do it like that. We want people to come and bring the best of what they know, bring the best of what they experience, and let it live somewhere. And that's tricky. I think culturally, that's a tricky thing for people in small communities, or it can be.
Yeah, change is hard, right? Like change, self-improvement is hard. Change is hard. Challenging norms is hard. That's all super scary and hard. And change gets met with resistance, right? And that's just, and so again, I agree with that. But knowing that you're going to face some of that is kind of half the battle, right? Like, right. It's okay. It's okay to, if there's resistance to change, it's not necessarily a symptom of that community. That's a universal truth, right? Yes, like change is hard, and letting go of what we used to be is hard. And the good news is, and again, this is another selling point, if you will, for smaller rural communities. You can have a pretty big impact on your community in a rural place. And, so if you're in a large urban area, it can be much harder to enact whatever change it is that you believe will make that place a better place. But in a smaller community, it's much more attainable to create a group of people that can bring about positive change. And most change is positive. So
right. That was actually going to be my second point with these young folks, right? This generation that's now going to be coming into the workforce, Gen Z, if you will, right? Yep. Again, it's like, doesn't matter what their label is. It's just recognizing that they're the most socially conscious generation to ever have stepped foot into the workforce. And so that's what we get to sell to them is impact. Contribution and impact. It's such an important and underutilized thing. And so, like what this looks like for me here in Oaks, I'm older than that. But I see it and I just think it is so cool. And it's such a positive spin on the air quotes is my term, entitlement, that we think this generation just possesses, like a deep sense of apathy. They don't care, they don't strive, they don't work hard, they have no work ethic. They're entitled. Well, okay. So some of that on its face may be true. There's this other really amazing thing that it's their social consciousness. They care about stuff. And so if our community can provide avenues for them to make the kind of impact that they want to make, that's a deep sense of belonging and connection to a place. And then as you change stuff, as you are a part of groups that are changing things, that just becomes part of your legacy, like what you've done in your time there. It's just such a special thing to be able to sell and market and brand, if you will, for any small community.
And that, again, becomes part of the narrative, right? If at the end of the day, I view my job as it's my job to write our own narrative, finding a way to weave that placemaking into the narrative is a good thing. And then it's just a matter of trying to figure out, okay, how do we get as many earballs and people to see and hear this message,
right?
That they know that we exist. And so, yeah, that's my gig.
So as we wrap, if you give one bit of advice to anybody, because our listeners tend to just be, I've kind of decided that because I went down a path when we first started Growing Small Towns, it's nonprofit, right? Went down the path of okay, I want to talk to economic developers. And then I quickly would find myself in rooms full of economic developers. And I was like, I don't fit. I'm very much like the Sesame Street, one of these things is not like the other. I was like, I don't belong here. I don't know. And so really it to me is more about a spirit, right? Like a spirit of just, I want cool stuff to happen in my town.
Yeah.
And so they're the kind of, so our listeners are the kind of people that want that and then are willing to take the risk to try those things. And so that's what this podcast is all about, is highlighting the different ways that we could do that. So thinking about that person listening from their, probably on some dirt road, right? In their small town, what's one thing that every single listener could do right now to kind of push the rural rebound for their own community based on, what you've seen, what you've experienced in your work?
One thing is, so I've talked about narrative, writing your own narrative. The other part that I haven't mentioned about that is our self-talk. So the one thing that everybody who hears this or could do is when you're talking about your community is monitor, filter the way that you talk about it. And I don't mean you, I mean you, the collective us, right? So again, back to these meetings, when people would start to go down the road of what we used to have and what we used to be and what we used to whatever, that's negative self-talk. I don't want to sound like I've ever been in therapy, but I might have been in therapy once or twice before.
Yeah, I'm in therapy. I'm pro therapy, Eric.
Okay.
We can talk about that openly here.
so that's that negative self-talk. It's easy to blame others for our current state, right? Absolutely. Whatever that may be, right? It's easy to say, oh, the traditional narrative of the traditional media has us where we are right now. The harder part is to say how we talk about ourselves is as much of a factor as how somebody else talks about us. And I can't control how the outside thing talks about us. The only thing I can control is my self-talk. So the one thing I would say that everybody out there can do to address whatever this resident recruitment, human recruitment, talent recruitment is to monitor your self-talk. And when you find yourself in a group of people and you start to go down that woe is us road,
right?
Remind yourself that nobody's, in Ben's words, nobody's going to move here out of pity.
Right.
So we need to speak well of ourselves, celebrate what makes our rural places unique, both the good and the bad, right? The old and the new. There's that yin and the yang. That's it. It's not that when now I'm rambling and this is too long of an answer, but
no, you're good. I like it.
When you mentioned facing resistance, about change or about newness or about whatever. The other thing to keep in mind is when you're a doctor, the Hippocratic Oath, rule number 1 is do no harm, right?
Right.
And so when we're talking about the evolution of rural places or the changing of rural places, we do have to celebrate the positives of the past, right? There are reasons to stay connected to those roots. And the last thing is we want to do is turn a rural place into an urban place. And then, then people don't get living there for the reasons that they lived there in the first place. So,
right.
So
yeah, we do that. I mean, that's like at Growing Small Towns. That's one of we have 5 core values. That's one of them is we honor the past and we look ahead. It's both of those things. Like we wouldn't be who we are today if it wasn't for the amazing things and people that came before us.
Right.
And yet we still have to say, okay, does what we did 20, 30 years ago, is there a way that can be done in today's context right? Because we are living in different times. Like there's
Absolutely.
just, and again, people have always been people, stuff is stuff, places are places. Like I get that, but it's recognizing the opportunity. Like, is there something we can learn from the past? Yeah, obviously, we cannot repeat mistakes. That'd be cool.
Right.
But it's just saying if we miss it or love it so much, what would it look like to resurrect it or to do something like it in today's context? And I think that's where the inspiration can hit too, right? I mean, it's just, well, and so we also had Jeff Sigler from Revitalize or Die. You should check his stuff out. He's great. He talks about civic self-esteem.
Sure.
That's how he refers to this. And so that negative self-talk, that's what it is. Yep. If you talk badly about yourself, you don't have a good outlook, a positive outlook about you and your place in the world. The same thing happens with our communities. So I'm going to challenge our audience to take your bit of advice and add one extra little layer. And it's when you hear other people talking negatively about your place, if you're so brave and so bold, is to just ask a few more questions of them. Don't necessarily directly challenge them. Yep. But when people say, like, a common thing in a community like mine is, well, there's just nothing to do here, right? And so then you say, well, where are you looking for events? What kinds of things are you looking for? What would make this place feel great to you? Like, those are questions, right? You just engage that person and find out, because that's just an easy complaint to make. Mm-hmm. And most of the time, small towns have tons of stuff going on. So then is it a marketing problem? Do we not have the right kinds of events? Like, engage that person, find out where they're really at with things, because we don't want that person running around telling everybody, well, there's nothing to do in Oaks.
And that slower pace of life, shall we say, is the exact reason people want to move there now.
Right.
There's people in the world that have way too much stuff to do, that have way too much going on. Their lives are chaotic because of the place they live in. And they would love to know that there's a place on earth where there isn't always a million things that need to be. So it's putting a positive, if it's a laid back lifestyle you're looking for, right. We got it. We got it. We got it in spades. So, and
another fun thought, just again, if that's your community's thing and you really want to sell that a laid back, slower pace of life is valuable. Also, you can't become a creative individual until you experience boredom. Right. So creativity can flourish in a small town too if there's just less going on.
Absolutely.
And you've got leftover space to become creative and innovative. So
I like it.
There's like literally a spin for everything. And it's not lying. It is literally just looking for the positive optimism, the hope in any particular challenge. And so I think that's an awesome challenge to our audience, is to check the self-talk and to figure out what you're good at, figure out what your assets are, and come from a place of strength.
Absolutely. 100%.
Everyone's got them. So Erik, it was so fun chatting with you. I hope to get to meet you in person someday.
That'd be great.
Like economic development conferences or something.
I feel like a fish out of water at those too.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, we'll just park.
you and I can sit in back. And
so good to meet you. Keep up. And I'm sure we'll have you on again sometime soon.
All right. Thank you very much.